We're going to talk about a piercing that's close to my heart, both physically and otherwise. We're going to talk about male nipple piercings. Coming up next on Pros and Cons by a Piercer, Season 2, Episode number 3. So you should probably stick around. For those who are new to the channel, my name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I own and operate the Axiom Body Piercing Studio, located here in Des Moines, Iowa, inside Skin Kitchen Tattoo. So, when I talk to you about these things, I'm talking to you with a level of expertise that comes from being in the body piercing industry for well over 26 years. This piercing is very special to me, partly for a few different reasons. First off, when I was about 12 years old, I decided that I wanted them. I don't know where the idea came from. I don't know why I wanted them. I don't know what the motivation was, but it was there. And it continued to grow throughout my development into my adulthood. When I became an adult, I started looking into possibilities of doing the piercing and what was available, and there was very, very little available in my area of the country. So I started researching getting the piercing done. There was very little information out there. There was a little bit in tattoo magazines, and I happened, or luckily happened upon, things like in the early 90s, like Modern Primitives, the book that everybody should read, and also copies of Piercing Fans Quarterly International. And began to contact some people that were in there to get some information. They were very, very, very open about information, very helpful. And the more I started getting into this, the more I thought, hey, I want to do this as a career. And so I went through my apprenticeship. And at the end of the apprenticeship, generally it's kind of a tradition or a thing we do. You usually get a piercing. Mine was my nipples. It was the first piercing I got done other than my ears, and so it has a lot of meaning to me. Unfortunately, I did lose one of them about 3 years ago. I plan on hopefully one day, if the tissue repairs enough, to re-pierce it. My left one. The one that was closest to my heart. Anyway, so with that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about the history of this particular piercing. This is represented in a few different parts of the world in indigenous cultures, things like in North America, and a lot of the North American native tribes did do nipple piercings. Also, some of the Northern African indigenous people did it. There's always this connection or claim that it was done by the Romans first, and that comes from the Imperial Guard would wear a breastplate, which looked like a torso of a male, and they would also have a hole through the nipples and rings that they would attach their cape to. Their nipples weren't actually pierced. It was just the armor that was pierced. But it kind of goes back to, somebody had to have gotten pierced at that point. Somebody had to have at least thought about it or went, hey, that's a good idea. But there's no real proof that the Romans pierced their nipples. There's just isn't. I'm sorry. In the 14th century, it kind of became a little bit of a fad as the women's breast became more and more visible, but that's more about female nipples. Really, with male nipples, the real big increase, regardless of what happened during the Victorian age, was the gay in leather and alternative scene of the late 1970s and probably sooner, where it became predominant to get their nipples pierced. That moved into modern piercing, and it's basically one of those kind of bedrock piercings of modern piercings. It was one of those ones that was constantly done prior to that and continued to be a big thing afterwards. So it's got a long lineage, especially in modern times. Okay, with that all out of the way, let's talk about the pros, the advantages, the things we like about this particular piercing. Number one, this piercing is number one. This piercing can increase the sensitivity of the area. This varies from person to person. I often say it may make it better. It probably is going to make it worse, but it's definitely going to be different. And this piercing will do that. Me personally, I had no sensitivity except pain in my nipples prior to having them pierced. Afterwards, it was an entirely different ballgame. Number 2, it enhances the look of the area, makes it look better. I really think this is one of those piercings that you look at a bare nipple and it just cries to be pierced, and it just looks great once they've healed correctly. Number 3, it will cause the nipple to develop more or look like it's more developed. Many of us have underdeveloped nipples. Men have underdeveloped nipples. They really don't exist. They're just kind of this flat thing. Getting them pierced, especially when you pierce behind them and through the areola, can cause them to develop and get larger and be more prominent than they were beforehand. If you're self-conscious about that and have been, piercing the nipples may improve that situation. Number 4, it is easy to hide these. If you work in a conservative career or industry, maybe you live in a conservative part of the world, this is one of those piercings that nobody needs to know you have unless you show them or you tell them. It's easy to conceal under clothing, not usually a problem. Number 5, this piercing has a long history of healing. It might be a difficult heal from time to time, but this piercing usually will heal. It's not experimental. It's not something that is magically only works on certain people. This piercing has a long history of healing on multiple different people. Now let's move on to the cons and disadvantages, things that aren't so great about this piercing. The first one being is it has a very long healing period. It can range anywhere from 6 months to a year, maybe longer with some people. So it really does take a commitment to heal these out. Number 2, it is not a comfortable piercing to get done. It is a painful piercing to get done. In fact, I do think as far as I'm concerned, it is probably one of the most painful that you can do on the male body. That varies. I've had some clients where it's like, I don't even feel it. And then I've had other clients where they're like, yeah, that was definitely the worst thing I've experienced. Understand, even in that case, the pain is probably not going to be nearly as bad as you think it's going to be. Still, you should be prepared and know that it's not going to feel great. Number 3, in some cases, this piercing can migrate or reject, especially with improper jewelry or improper care. They tend to kind of migrate a little bit one way or another no matter what you do. Usually outward, they are a piercing that is prone to that. If they're done properly, usually well anchored, you won't have any issue whatsoever. You might notice a little bit movement or a little bit of movement over time. Number 4, this piercing can be grumpy. Now, when I say grumpy, I mean it can be sensitive to the touch. It can be kind of look gross. It just has a tendency to do that throughout the healing period. You definitely don't want anything against it. You definitely want to avoid contact whenever possible. And it isn't like on other piercings where they feel kind of okay to get bumped or moved around a little bit after a month or two. This piercing, it can be well into the healing time and it can still be really sensitive. Number 5, this piercing is greatly affected, even a healed one, by the jewelry you choose to put in it. Especially when it comes to circular jewelry. It can cause a well-healed piercing to suddenly act up and have issues. So jewelry is very important with this, and having the right jewelry is very important with this piercing. Now let's talk a little bit about things you should look for with your piercer during the process or before you get the piercing done. First one, your piercer should have a lot of experience with this piercing. They should have examples of the piercing that they've done in the past, photographs of healed piercings, not ones they did and they took a photo 2 minutes after they did it. The second thing you want to talk to them about is whether or not they do freehand or whether they do forceps. The difference is great between the two. Personally, I think freehand hurts more and is more prone to being crooked. 99% of the ones that I've seen over the years that aren't done correctly, that it seems like this is your nipple, right? Or pierce like this, or pierce like this, are usually done freehand. Forceps allow you to control the area. It also compresses the tissue, which makes the needle pass through faster, and it supports the tissue. It's a lot easier to control the angle of that piercing, both this way, and that way, if you have a set of forceps keeping that tissue in place. It also allows you to pull it out, so it's a little bit easier to work with. Now, if they do freehand and they have a lot of experience with it, and you saw great examples of piercings they've done, it's not that big of a factor. But if they've only been doing it a year or two and there's not really a lot of great examples, yeah, I would probably move along to someone else who does it with a set of forceps. The next thing is your piercer should give you a consultation of some sort that covers the risks that are involved with the piercing, what it's going to take to heal it, and talk to you about any metal sensitivities you have, any type of allergies you have to products, any medication you might be on, any health issues you may have, basically anything that may cause an issue during the healing process or during the healing or during the piercing itself. Next thing, your piercer should take a look at your anatomy to ensure that they can do it correctly and to make sure that they're sizing the jewelry correctly for your body. With this one, most people have underdeveloped nipples, so placement is usually going to be behind it. The jewelry needs to be a bit oversized, not only for that reason, but also because you want to allow some space for swelling. Next thing to look for is they should suggest that you pierce this initially with a straight, standard barbell, not a curved barbell, not a ring. You can heal them out with rings, but they need to be extremely oversized. They're more traumatic. They're more prone to problems. I usually suggest, hands down, do it with barbells. After it heals, if you want to switch out to circular jewelry, circular barbells, rings, etc., it usually is an issue. But this one, you're going to have the best results with a standard barbell, and you want to look for somebody that does that. If they offer a curved barbell, first off, make them explain why they would ever pierce a nipple with a curved barbell, especially if they have any straight ones in stock. And usually if they start to pull out the curved barbell and you go, hey, do you have any straight ones? And they say no, that's the real reason why they're piercing with a curved barbell. They're limiting the amount of stock they have to save money, and it's easier to stock a bunch of curved barbells and use it on nipples, navels, and various other piercings than have the proper jewelry in hand. And if I didn't mention this already, I kind of think I already did. The piercing jewelry needs to be oversized. It needs to be a little bit bigger than what you're going to need. You don't want it flat and tight to the piercing area during the healing process. You want a little bit of space there to allow for growth and inflammation or swelling. Now let's talk about the piercing experience itself. What is that going to be like? First off, as I mentioned earlier, there's the big difference between forceps and freehand. If they're going to use forceps, of course, they're going to go through the basic prep of the area. They're going to mark it, and they should be marked while you're standing. Then, once they've done that, they should put you in a reclined position or semi-reclined position, and then clamp with a set of Pennington forceps to flatten out the tissue, inject a needle in and through, very quick. However, the forceps don't feel terrific. A lot of people compare them to nipple clamps. They're not fun. And sometimes it takes a little bit of work to kind of move and maneuver the tissue to get it in the proper place so that they can be pierced correctly. That part doesn't feel great. The actual piercing itself is very quick, but it tends to be a bit on the sharp side. It can be more painful than most other piercings, and usually some people will experience kind of an instant warmth or electrical charge kind of feeling right after the piercing. Insertion should be pretty simple, unless they're circular jewelry, which I've already advised you against. Straight barbell, guide pin follows the jewelry straight, or follows the needle straight through. Not very prone to separation and a lot of other issues that rings have, and etc. Once that's over with, you're going to probably notice some throbbing and aching. It can last a while. Some people, 20, 30 minutes. The piercing area is going to be extremely sensitive to touch. Try to avoid any contact whatsoever and kind of plan ahead for that. Don't plan on going like on a jog or hike or a motorcycle ride after getting your nipples pierced. It's a good idea to kind of just lounge around the house or pick some activity that you're not going to be moving around a lot. Now let's talk about healing. Average healing time on this particular piercing is going to be 6 months to a year. Some people a little bit longer. It varies from person to person. You really don't know until you start healing the piercing out. If you do both sides, it's not uncommon for one side to heal faster than the other side. That's normal. You want to clean the piercing twice daily using saline, as I mentioned. You also want to practice cross-contamination prevention. Most of this is common sense stuff your mom should have taught you. Things like washing your hands where you handle it, keeping everybody else's dirty fingers away from it, no oral contact or exchanging of bodily fluids on or around the piercing, keeping your environment clean, clothing, bedding, towels, anything that may come in contact with the piercing. Also keeping pets away from the area. Do not let them sleep in the bed with you. They're just germ magnets. They're just going to drag contaminants into your bed. The last thing is the thing I get asked over and over and over again. Let me just make this clear. I do not suggest swimming with a healed piercing. I don't care what you cover it with. I don't care how quickly you clean it or how clean the environment is. Swimming is asking for an infection. There's no way to guarantee pool water, hot tub water, ocean, river, creek, stream, pond, the puddle in your at the mall, the thing that you dug up in the backyard, you put a plastic pool in. None of that stuff is going to be clean. The only thing you can guarantee is going to be clean and fairly free of microorganisms that may cause an infection is your clean and well-maintained bathtub. Nothing else. After it heals, then you can go swimming. It won't affect anything at all because it's no longer an open wound. It won't cause issues. It might cause a few people to go, yeah, honey, he has his nipples pierced. But beyond that, no, it won't cause issues. So no swimming during the healing. After the healing, okay. So we got that clear. The next thing is you want to avoid contact or trauma with the area. As I said, nipple piercings are very sensitive. They are one of those piercings that you might be 2-3 months into the process and then all of a sudden they flare up because you decided they felt fine and you would just sleep on them. You just have to keep these piercings isolated for the whole healing process. One of the causes of migration and rejection is that pressure on the piercing. Also, it's going to cause bumps and other issues. So isolating the piercing, keeping things away from it, and that includes suspenders or shirts with pockets that you put stuff in. Just avoid contact as much as possible. Now, it's not going to be common for the first 3 to 5 days to see redness, discolorization, heat, tenderness to touch, inflammation, swelling. It's also sometimes some people will see a little bit of slight bleeding anywhere from 3 to 5 days. This is all normal. It's a reaction to the piercing itself, the trauma that's involved, and the fact that you made an open wound on your body and then put a piece of material in it. So it's going to bleed occasionally, possibly. And as I mentioned, but I'm going to reinforce it, do not sleep on the piercing. Sleep on your side or your back. Constantly sleeping on them. I don't care how much it doesn't hurt. Well, that constant movement, shifting we do in our sleep, plus the amount of pressure that you're applying, your whole weight onto that piercing is going to cause issues. So, no sleeping on the piercing until it's completely healed. And even then, you may find it extremely uncomfortable or it may cause issues. So you kind of have to change your sleeping pattern if you're a stomach sleeper. I was a stomach sleeper before I got my nipples pierced. After my nipples were pierced, I'm a side sleeper. I can't even fall asleep on my stomach anymore. Okay, with that out of the way, let's talk about jewelry options. This piercing, standard straight barbells is usually the best option. It's going to have the lowest profile. I would suggest that if they are a bit on the long side, especially if they're getting caught on things, to try a shorter one, downsize it. It's best to see your piercer to get the correct size of what's going to work or not work. Rings are always possible. The problem with rings, or the concern of rings, is they need to be oversized. They need to be too large for the piercing. You want as little of the ring itself to be inside the piercing as possible because we want to make that piercing area, the jewelry that's in the piercing, as flat as possible. If you start doing these huge arcs like where it's just really super tight circle, it's going to cause issues. It's going to make them lay or want to flip outward. It's going to cause pressure when they're down. It can cause the piercing to suddenly kind of migrate downward and sometimes out. So make sure the jewelry, especially if you go to circular jewelry, rings or circular barbells, etc., that it is sized correctly. And usually there should be 1/8 of an inch or so of extra room up to 1/4 of an inch of extra room. Now let's talk about living with the piercing. The biggest thing I will tell you about this one, and I keep coming back to it, is they don't really do well with trauma. Even after the piercing is healed, it's best to kind of keep things away from it. I think that's why a lot of people say, oh, my nipple piercing's never healed. Because they think that they're going to get to a point where they can like pull on them and twist them and, I don't know, hang car keys off of, and it's not going to hurt later. It's sensitive tissue. In one of the reasons why a lot of people get nipples pierced is to increase the sensitivity and make that nipple more developed. So if it is more sensitive, then it's going to be more sensitive to trauma and etc. So listen to your body. If it hurts to do something, you probably shouldn't be doing it. The next thing is the jewelry should be left in at all times. Do not remove the jewelry and leave it out for extended period of times. With nipple piercings, it is not uncommon to have them for 10 years, take them out for a couple hours for whatever reason, and have problems getting them back in. They're definitely one of those piercings where leaving the jewelry in is your best option. And as I mentioned earlier, you may need to downsize or change your jewelry once it heals. You want to avoid loose or hanging jewelry in some cases, especially when we're dealing with stray barbells. Sometimes having something that's a little bit tighter is going to increase the longevity of the piercing and eliminate any possibilities of tearing or damage to the piercing while you live with it. Now let's talk about the last thing, abandoning the piercing. If you get to a situation where you just do not want the piercing anymore, what should you do? Removing the jewelry, if it's during the healing process, you want to remove the jewelry, and you also want to keep an eye on it just like you would any other wound. It should seal up like a puncture or a cut or anything else. There shouldn't be any signs of infection or what have you. Just keep an eye on it. Usually they'll heal over very, very quickly. If you had the piercing for a number of years and you just want to take the jewelry out and abandon them, usually the piercing holes will slowly begin to close. A lot of people have this misconception about piercings and how they heal shut. Usually the piercing will seal in the center of the piercing first. Then it will slowly begin to fill up the two holes. So a piercing may appear to be open, but the reality is that in the inside it's completely sealed shut. So if you abandon the piercing, you might see those piercing entrances and etc. Another thing that's going to be common, or a question I get from time to time, is, well, my piercing or my nipples weren't really developed. Now they feel very developed and they look like they're erect all the time. If I take the jewelry out, will that change? Not usually. Usually that whatever form that nipple is in at the time you remove the jewelry, it's going to stay in that. And sometimes when people have really, really small nipples, it creates kind of the nipple, and then we have to do it further back, so it creates kind of a tunnel effect on both sides where it's like a cave and then the nipple. I don't know how else to describe it. Maybe I'll find a photo somewhere and put it up for you. With those, they're probably going to stay in the same state. Over time, eventually the piercing will start to fade and that scar tissue will start to fade and it'll look more like normal tissue. That can take a number of years for it to do that, especially if the piercing had to be done well into the areola instead of in front or just straight through the base of the nipple. Well, that's all I have to say on the subject of male nipple piercings today, pros and cons. I hope you found it edifying. I hope you found it enjoyable and educational and maybe cleared up some misconceptions or questions that you had. If it hasn't, feel free to leave a comment. I usually answer them if I have time. If you liked the video, please, especially if you found it helpful, give us a thumbs up. Let us know that you liked it because we like it when you like it. If you haven't subscribed already, please hit the subscription. Click on that notification bell so that you're notified every single time we post something. If you like merch, T-shirts, fanny packs, phone cases, all that fun stuff, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. There's also one of those merch bars below. Till next time, here's hoping all your piercings heal with ease and without a single issue And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, I hope to see you for your body piercing needs in the future. Have a good day, everybody. Take care. Take care of one another. You stay healthy. Wash your damn hands and wear a mask. Till next time.